One of Facebook's co-founders has called for the breakup of the social media giant. Chris Hughes started Facebook with CEO Mark Zuckerberg 15 years ago, but he now says that the social network is too big and powerful.
Well, the Facebook that exists today is not the Facebook that we founded in 2004. And the one that we have today, I think, is far too big, it's far too powerful, and most importantly, its CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, is not accountable. I'm angry at Mark, and I'm angry at a lot of Facebook's leadership for taking something that held so much promise and could have been so amazing and sacrificing quality, security, civility for clicks.
In a New York Times op-ed, Chris Hughes also said, "We are a nation with a tradition of reining in monopolies. No matter how well-intentioned the leaders, Mark's power is unprecedented and un-American." Roosevelt Institute's Executive Director Felicia Wong supports Hughes' position, but says the issue is even bigger than Facebook, and she joins us now via Skype to explain her views. Felicia, great to see you.
Good morning.
So just make the case for us. Why should Facebook be broken up, and what would that accomplish?
Well, breaking up large technology companies is essential to reining in corporate power broadly in the economy. And one of the reasons our economy isn't as healthy as it should be is because large companies just have too much power. You know, if you're not looking at technology companies as a way to really bring a new antitrust back to America, it's sort of like trying to deal with climate policy without dealing with fossil fuel companies. They just have too much power, which Chris said.
Well, Felicia, what I'm confused about on this is in the past trust-busting actions, you could take Standard Oil and you could create regional oil companies. How would you create regional Facebooks? Like, there can't be a Facebook for Texas and a Facebook for New York State at the same time. What does it mean to break up Facebook in practice?
Well, part of what Chris is calling for is an unwinding of Facebook's various apps. You've got WhatsApp, you've got Instagram, but that's really not the only thing that is at stake here. I think Chris is also calling for government, which does have the power to do this. You mentioned our antitrust history. He's calling for government to actually look for setting standards of civility and freer speech than actually Facebook is, and the other large tech companies are able to monitor right now.
What do you say to people who just point out that, you know, practically this is going to be very challenging because the current jurisprudence on antitrust is basically you have to prove that consumers are impacted, that prices are raised because of the monopoly power. And obviously with Facebook, everything is technically free. Of course, they're taking our data and using that for their own benefit, but technically it's free. So you can't make the case that consumers are being hurt here.
Right. Well, I actually think this leads into exactly the fight we need to have, and that frankly many presidential candidates, you heard them over the weekend, but many presidential candidates seem also willing to have about the very nature of antitrust. This idea that the consumer welfare standard and pricing is the only thing we should be concerned about when we look at the market power of corporations is simply not right, and it isn't actually part of the American tradition. Trust busters, both Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt, cared about overwhelming corporate power in a lot of different ways, including the overwhelming political power that large companies have. And we clearly see that as a problem in our economy and in our democracy today. And so I think that the call for the breakup of Facebook is the tip of the spear in a much larger and very important political fight that I look forward to having.
Give us an idea of what other social media companies or big tech companies that need to be regulated or broken up, in your opinion.
Well, I think there are a lot of large social media companies and tech companies that we ought to look at. But I'd actually like to take a step back here to make the larger argument that in every sector of our economy, in airlines, in agriculture, we see a very few companies. Sometimes it has consumer effects. Plenty of people are complaining about what the airlines are doing these days with pricing, with baggage, with having to stand in line. I mean, these are things that actually do affect consumers. But more than that, I think we have to be concerned overall about the power that large companies and their CEOs have in setting the rules of our economy. And what's interesting to me is you actually see hedge fund executives now, you see Fortune 500 CEOs also questioning whether the way we've begun to practice capitalism American style at the very, at this point in our history is really healthy. A lot of people are asking about whether or not we ought to have different and new kinds of rules given the way our economy has evolved.
I know Senator Sanders is focused in particular on agriculture and the massive amount of consolidation there, the way it's affected farmers and the profits they're able to derive. Who do you see as having done sort of the most thinking on the Democratic side in terms of antitrust, not just in tech, but across the economy?
Well, it's actually clear that Senator Warren has been a leader in thinking about corporate power. Obviously her political career, she started thinking about the banks and the way the banks aren't necessarily leading to more consumer welfare. But you see it across the board in the Democratic field. I think it's pretty notable that Senator Klobuchar, who's running as a self-described moderate, is also very concerned about monopoly power. You heard Mayor Pete Buttigieg over the weekend making a similar call for looking at the power of big companies. So I think you see this everywhere, whether it's the centrist or whether it's the progressive.
One of the biggest criticisms that I've seen of this is that if you break up Facebook or if you make it more difficult for American social media companies to operate in the United States, that Chinese social media companies will actually move in and fill that space. You're already actually seeing that with the emergence of TikTok and other platforms amongst teens in the US, and this could actually create a surveillance nightmare in terms of their technology usage in the US. What do you think about that criticism?
Well, I already think we have a surveillance nightmare.
Fair.
Talked about surveillance capitalism and the way that a number of companies, Chinese obviously, but also American or international, now have the power to really surveil and track you, track your data, track the very notion of privacy is part of what we're talking about here. So I definitely agree that we should be looking at more innovation in the sector overall as a way to address national security concerns. But I'm not convinced, if you just look at the history of AT&T and the way the breakup of AT&T led to much more innovation, I'm really not convinced that the national security argument is anything more than a red herring.
Felicia, do you also, some argue that monopoly power also has contributed to rising levels of inequality in this country? So it's not just consumers who are being hurt, workers are being hurt as well. Of course, consumers and workers are in many ways the same group. But is that something that you've seen supported by the research?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually one of the most important points about this new economics that's looking at the power of monopolies and large corporations writ large. Some research actually done by fellows here at the Roosevelt Institute just a year or two ago really found that one of the problems with large companies isn't only consumer prices, it's actually also wages. So if you have a situation where there's only one employer in a region, for example, you tend to see that employer squeezing workers on wages. You see lower wages in these areas tends actually to be rural areas. You see a real heartland problem, where of course you see a lot of Trump voters. You see a real heartland problem with wages in places where companies are too big and too powerful. So I think this monopoly moment's going to last for a very long time because I think it goes to the heart of what we care about the American economy, for consumers and, you're right, for workers.
Felicia, one last thing, totally different topic, but that I wanted to get your learned take on is we're starting to get a little bit of the contours of former Vice President Joe Biden's climate plan. His team has been saying that they're looking for a middle ground on climate. They're looking to go back to the Paris Accord and kind of go back to the Obama era in terms of what we were doing on climate change. What's your view of that? Is that sufficient, and does that match the challenge that's laid out by the most recent science?
Well, I really look forward to hearing what Vice President Biden's notion of a middle ground is on climate, because one of the most important points in the latest climate debate is that there's general agreement that some kind of price on carbon, some kind of market price on carbon is one important element, and that is often the center of anything that people call a middle ground in climate policy. But I would argue, and the latest science and the latest economists argue, that you need to go much farther than that. And you actually need to look at very large-scale public investments in some kind of much more green infrastructure. You also need to look at real regulation reining in the oil and gas companies, in addition to some kind of price on carbon, if you're going to see any kind of meaningful climate action against climate change. So I look forward to hearing Vice President Biden and all the candidates continue to outline their ideas, and I think it's pretty clear we have to be as aggressive as possible. Paris is very important, but I think we have to go far beyond even what that laid out if we're going to meet what the climate scientists say is necessary.
Felicia, thank you. Great
Thanks,
to have
Felicia.
you this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up on Rising, what do you get when you combine actress Margot Robbie's star power, major studio support, and a training facility teaching incarcerated people firefighting skills?
The film Firefighters is an example of producer Scott Budnick's efforts to combine high-quality filmmaking with activism. He tells his story to Hill TV's Jamal Simmons next.